But again, something that crosses partisan lines, and it's great for us all to be able to work together on this file.
Okay, thank you. Recognize the member for Memram Cook Tantramar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister and the team that's here this morning to answer our questions. I also want to comment on the Premier's Council on Disabilities being such a supportive organization for I know my office when we're trying to navigate different systems, and especially for constituents who are looking for support. So that's always very much appreciated. It's a very valuable resource for us. I want to begin by just asking for a clarification on a question that was already asked. And I believe the Minister said that stakeholders had been brought together, and I just wanted to clarify, was the Minister referring to the ad hoc interdepartmental committee that was referred to in recommendation 1? And if so, are they meeting quarterly as was recommended? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, through you to the member opposite, the answer to your question, yes and yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to the Minister for the very quick and direct response. I also heard the Minister say that there will be hearings this summer, which was going to be one of my questions in the throne speech. There was reference to these types of hearings. I was wondering, I'm not sure if the Minister can be more specific around when, but specifically which committee would be holding these hearings, or what is that going to look like? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, through you to the member opposite, thanks for that question. And the way in which the hearings will be put together and the committee that will manage them would be decided by the legislature. So even though I think staff have ideas on how that could look, there's a strong desire not to prejudge a decision of this chamber. So wouldn't want to share anything on that today. So that's going to be up for you and me and the rest of us to decide in the course of the next few weeks. And in terms of the timing of the hearings and the way those will be structured, that again will depend to an extent on the discussion between government House leader and opposition House leaders, but of course as well on the context of the pandemic, and because that obviously has a huge impact on our ability to operate in person, virtually, or at all. So that remains uncertain, but hopefully by the time we gather as a legislature again, we might be able to have more clarity on those questions. But sorry for not being able to answer more directly.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to the Minister for the response. It sounds like it's still undecided, so it makes sense to not be able to give a full response. One thing that comes up often when we're discussing budgets and policies, although not as often as it should, is the idea of gender-based analysis plus. And as has been said, if it's done properly, it shouldn't just be about gender, it should be about a lot of different things. However, having specific tools to look at things like how policies affect people with disabilities is important. And recommendation 2 is that of the Disability Action Plan that was from last summer, recommends that the government adopt a disability policy lens as a tool to assist government when developing or reviewing government programs and policies, and they recommend that it be adopted by 2021. So I wanted to ask the status of this recommendation.
Mr. Chair, through to the member opposite. Thanks very much for that question. It's something it's very close to my heart. My partner was one of the architects of Canada's GBA Plus strategy federally and developing some of the tools that are now being used across Canada, including here in New Brunswick. And I was really proud earlier this year to vote for the first budget presented in this legislature that was run through a GBA Plus lens from top to bottom, because I think it's a policy tool that makes sense. And the more that we can look at the impacts of any government decision on any group of citizens and make sure that there are accommodations and adjustments made, that's all to the good and helps us provide the best possible government for the people of the province. In terms of where we are right now with making sure that we're moving ahead on the recommendation, as the member mentioned, there have been multiple internal meetings to move along with that process. And it's not yet completed, but when it is, of course, that will be shared with some honourable members and the details shared as well. So it's certainly something that, again, with our budget process and other government decisions, something we take very seriously. And I'm certainly proud to be part of a government that's rolling this out for the first time in a concrete way. Thanks to the honourable member for the question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the response. Hopefully that disability policy lens tool will be in place as soon as possible. It's good to hear that some of these recommendations are in the works. I guess I heard that recommendation 4 around the Accessibility Act is also in progress, and I guess I'd like to ask, are there any other recommendations? There's 43 here, so are there any other recommendations that have been implemented, or I suppose if there are ones that are just about to be implemented or significant progress has been made, I'd also want to know about that. Thank you.
The chair to the member opposite. It's one of the reasons for the hearings this summer is to move ahead with the recommendations and have engagements from all the outside and internal stakeholders as well. The Premier's Council would appear at them to make sure that as those recommendations are being implemented, that they have a broad range of community support. It's been one of the challenges for government. This report came out last summer, had an election, the pandemic, and the difficulty of continuing with sort of the broad range of consultations that are normally pretty close to the heart of government. And certainly for the first 2 years that this government was in power, the number of consultations that I personally was involved with, it was something that I think was very positive. And the more we can continue to reach out like that, I think it's all to the good. Whether majority or minority government, the more you can listen to the public and to the people who have their feet on the ground understanding a file, the better. I'd highlight one area where, of the 43 recommendations, that is well underway, which is around addressing the need for eliminating the backlog of psychoeducational assessments in schools, obviously close to my heart in the education department, and that directly led to the recommendations in Bill 35 to make sure that we have a supports in place to hire a couple of dozen resource teachers with 1,000 hours of additional training to work with our school psychologists, in addition to the work we're currently undergoing in negotiations to strengthen the number of school psychologists. But even with a full complement, we still need the assistance of those extra 25 resource teachers. So there's a concrete example of a recommendation that came out from a community that said, look, our needs are not being met, and rather than saying we're going to punt this down the road, we took action and are moving ahead with Bill 35, and I would hope I could earn the honourable member's support for that initiative. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you to the Minister. I suppose when you return with your Minister of Education cap on, and I have a chance to ask questions to the Department of Education, we can discuss that further. And I guess, as always is the case with estimates, it's such a valuable process, and there are time constraints. And so, unfortunately, I'm not able to ask more questions at this point, but I do want to, I can see that, you know, this report did just come out last summer, and there is some progress on some items, so I'll be following up to see where things go, and hopefully things move as quickly as possible. I guess, although some things have to move at pandemic pace right now, but I want to, through you, Mr. Chair, thank the Minister and the team that's here this morning for answering my questions. That's all from me. Thank you.
Any comments, Minister?
I'll just thank the honourable member very much for the questions, and again, having these sort of respectful, fact-based discussions is just the way that I think the people of this province want to see their legislature work. And thank you for your commitment to folks in this province with disabilities and for the work we're all trying to do to make their lives easier.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Recognize